forgot to film an intro, so here he is. Hey y'all, I'm Desi, and welcome back to my channel. Okay, yes, I'm in my bed because that's what we're doing today, okay? Mind your business. But I just want to quickly go over my February reads. I participated in Blackathon 2023, which was held by Jessie on YouTube. And I was on team Hatshepsut. And I read five. I read 5 books. I just want to quickly go over the books and what I thought. And then in my next video, I'll be going over my March reads, which are a lot of like book club reads. And I'm just very excited. Or the challenges. And I'm very, very, very excited. The first book I read was Felix Ever After. That book was so good. So good. Just so good. So if you haven't read that book, go read it. So good. I really liked the writing. I loved how... This is what I will say. I feel like people could be critical of some of the actions that the main character decided to make. However, if you stay in context with what he was going through, just if you have experience also of like trying to find your identity and just like the low-key traumatic things that were going on in his family, as well as the very traumatic things that happened within his school. And maybe this is just because I'm a psych major, so I always think about like the psychological impact of certain events and how that impacts future actions. And so I did find myself at points getting a little bit frustrated with some of the decisions that he was making, but then I was just like, that makes sense because of X, Y, and Z. So I really enjoyed that book. The only thing that I would say is I didn't love how both of the queer women of color were villainized, or like were the villains, I guess. Not even villain, but like we're just not great people, you know. And then one of the white people ended up being like such a great person. I don't know. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen in real life. I just thought it was a little weird. That's all. But that book was really, really good. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It hit close to home. I found myself crying multiple times, and I recommend it. The book was mainly about a high school student who was discriminated against in a very big and embarrassing way, and it's about his journey for getting revenge because you messed with the wrong one. Okay, the next book I read was She Would Be King by Way of Two More. Sis snapped. Okay, I loved how it brought in 3 different like overarching cultural backgrounds. There was a character that had African American lineage, a character that had Caribbean lineage, specifically Jamaican, and a character that had like a more direct African lineage. And I just loved how all 3 of those came together, and like the way she weaved in different cultural aspects and understandings and historical elements that are very true to our unique histories was just so good. I just loved it. I loved it. It was good.
At this moment, something decided to stab me in my eye, and I literally don't know what's going on. But we figured it out.
It was very good.
Or so we thought. But we later realized that it was just an eyelash that was in the wrong spot.
The next book that I attempted to read, but I ended up DNFing, was Riot Baby by Tochi Onibochi. I hope I got that right. Okay. I had a couple issues with this book. And I'm trying to like... So, my first issue, let's just talk about the writing. it wasn't really a style that I resonate with that much. I found the jumping from perspectives without it clearly being stated that it was a different perspective, like you kind of have to read to understand what whose perspective you were reading, was a bit confusing, and I just found myself lost a bit. I also didn't love that it took place in like, it just felt like a little bit stereotypical. Like it went from Compton to Harlem. And there's a story about African American, specifically African American experience in like our neighborhoods and things like that. I don't know. It just rubbed me a little bit weird. It rubbed me even more weird. When I found out that the author is Nigerian American. And I don't want to get into this whole thing about like, just like what counts as African, what counts as African American, da 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 da. What I will say, as someone who identifies as African American, and to me that means someone whose lineage traces back to United States chattel slavery. And so that's my lineage, that's my history, that's my ancestral ties. And so it always rubbed me a little bit weird when that story or those stories are told by people who are not directly from that culture, especially when like the whole story is focused on that. And just like, you just have to read the book to understand what I mean. It's just like African American culture was like just the center, from the way we talk, how we handle situations, from our lived experiences, the generational trauma. All of it is very African American. It rubbed me weird, one, that he doesn't come from that background. And then on top of that, how if you like, I was like looking him up just because I was reading and I was like, and I was like, let me look up this author. And I was just like reading some stuff. And he grew up in a predominantly white area, white school, white church, white neighborhood. And he didn't truly come into the understanding of Black and white racial relations. At least this is my understanding from what I've read, until he went to law school. And I'm just like, that's fine. That's fine. But for me, I can't remember a time when I was younger that I didn't have the reality of race in the United States like smacked in my face. Like my parents made it very obvious. They had to like put in the time and effort to teach us our history. Like I was watching Roots before I was in the double digits, like, because that's the reality. We had to have these hard conversations. I have 6 Black brothers. Like these conversations that were always being had in my home. And so it's just weird. I know, and that's not everyone's experience. So if you come into a better understanding later in life, that's fine. But I find it weird for you then to write a book about that experience when, 1, you don't come from the culture, and 2, this hasn't been your lived reality or your actual understanding for a good chunk of your life. And so for those reasons, I just decided to DNF the book. I'm not saying that the book hasn't had a great impact in helping people understand the impacts of prison and generational trauma and rioting and police brutality. I get it. And especially as someone who has had a direct impact from the prison industrial complex, like literally in my home, I understand. And I feel like that book could be very helpful in people understanding a little bit more about those perspectives. However, for me, it wasn't hidden. And that's all. I also read My Sister the Serial Killer by Oyinkan Braithwaite. Okay, I feel like the criticism of this book was a bit harsh. I think the title is misleading. I didn't find it to be a thriller or a horror book. And I think from that title, people are going to assume that it's solely about someone's sister being a serial killer. But I found, again, because I am passionate about psychology, I found the book very intriguing, especially if you're trying to understand the dynamics between the two sisters and how the trauma that they experienced at the hands of their father when they were younger impacts the way they interact with men and interact with each other in their adulthood. I found that very, very interesting and very, very sad, and I was just very intrigued throughout the whole book. I think if you were expecting the book to solely be a thriller, which I kind of was coming in, you're going to be disappointed. But I found the ending to make perfect sense with context that they gave of Nigeria and just their familial dynamics. The next book I read, and the last book for the Blackathon that I read, is The Perfect Ruin by Shanor Williams. And this book was so good. I would say it's probably that. I'm not gonna say it's my favorite, but that book, again, I was in my psychology bag, and it wasn't tiny, bit triggering as someone who actually has OCD. I mean, I can't say too much without giving the book away, but the latter portion of the book, it angered me. It did. It angered me quite a bit, not gonna lie. But it was very good, and I'm excited to read. There is like, I don't know if you would call it a companion novel, but there's a couple that appears in The Perfect Ruin that has their own story that's also a thriller that I really want to read. That was the last book that I read for the month. I technically finished it on March 1st, which was yesterday, but we finished it like nonetheless. But yeah, I feel like that was a good way to end up the Blackathon for me. I really enjoyed most of the books, and it was my first Blackathon, and I'm definitely gonna do it again in the future. Definitely. And yeah, stay tuned for my next video, and I'm going to be talking about my March reads, the book groups that I'm participating in, as well as the reading challenges. And yeah, I hope y'all enjoyed the video.